the popularism, pop culture of Buddhism, where you open a paper and every time I like read through Snow Lion, I'm kind of like, oh my God.
Just going, okay, great. So why again is Richard Gere interviewing Matthieu Ricard?
Yeah. I know. Well, actually, Richard Gere is a very well-motivated guy.
Oh,
but
good. Hey,
yeah,
he helps a ton of people.
Yeah.
Just in terms of...
When I lived in Bhutan for a year, I don't know how far this is going to go, but and just after I was there, both Richard Gere and Steven Seagal visited, and afterwards, the Bhutanese are just not going to buy any of this stuff, but afterwards they said, they got the wrong one as the tulku. That's what they said about Richard Gere, but I don't know him, so. But yeah, well, the marketing and the Hollywood, and I mentioned to you before that part of probably my attraction to the wise old man in India was it was as far away from Hollywood as I could get, having been kind of brought up in Hollywood. And then to find out that, here the Buddha Dharma has ended up back in Hollywood, that's pretty depressing. It's pretty depressing, but that's what American culture does with everything. I mean, that's what, anything sacred becomes a commodity on the marketplace, and it becomes, the glitter of Hollywood, inevitably, for as long as that lasts. Whether it's originally authentic or not doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And, there's partly, a question of whether maybe that's great. Maybe the fact that you can buy, Zen gardens in the local mall or other, Tara t-shirts or whatever is really wonderful for exposure, plants the seeds, so on and so on, lets people know there's this other. Or maybe it reduces it all down to this kind of idiot, consumer culture. I'm afraid that happens, but I'm not sure that it's 100% bad, and it's what's happening.
Sure.
And I mean, I'm pretty convinced that if this was the culture in which I had encountered Buddhism, I wouldn't be a Buddhist. And a lot of times when I see it, I wish I wasn't. I was like, man, is this embarrassing? Couldn't I say I'm something else? Because it's so tacky. It's just so tacky sometimes, and hokey, and mixed up. And I mean, I don't believe there was like a pure Dharma, and American Buddhism represents the opposite of that. I don't think you could identify where that pure Dharma was, because it's inside each person, So, but at the same time, it gets brought down to such a common denominator, and perhaps our romantic and even Orientalist ideas of sitting at the foot of the master have become almost absurd in comparison to what's going on in terms of.
Yeah, you can sit at the foot of the jumbotron.
Yeah, in terms of what Trungpa Rinpoche called this spiritual marketplace. So I don't know what to say, but I examine it a lot in a class I have that we've been developing, called Buddhism in America. We look at the popularization, how much of it is positive, how much is negative, and does it enhance inner practice and interiority, or does it make it, silly or something? I don't know what to say about that, but that's what it's about in America. And everybody also lays claim to all the teachings, I've noticed, too. Everybody's a Dzogchen master. Everybody who read about it in some book can now teach. The things that were like, especially the things that are considered the most profound, are also become the most superficialized by everyone laying claim to them, wanting to have the best, wanting to be the best. And what may get lost is the actual, really, the deep transmission of those things. It may, as more and more people think this is it, this is what that means. Somebody's talking about, some vague state of non-duality, and that must be Dzogchen or Mahamudra. So I got it now. And after a while, people will forget what what's really going on. How fast that happens. I was watching these dances one time in Bhutan that were revelations of Pema Lingpa, and I was sitting with the Pema Lingpa, tulku, Ganteng tulku, and I said, and these are they're treasure tech, revelations. And I said, well, what does it mean? The dancer goes, oh, I don't know. You have to ask this old man. And there was this old man sitting next to him a couple of seats down, and I didn't at the time. And then I thought to, and that man had already died, like a month later. And then I thought, well, that was it. So then there's just the form left, and not the what's really going on. And that happens in little things like that all over the place constantly, and one wonders if the whole thing will be. We have to just somehow hope that someone is really practicing profoundly somewhere to not lose it.
So, in using the term transmission, that's another one.
Another loaded term. Yeah. That particular loaded term is loaded only because of one particular group, which is the Shambhala group, where they started calling what has been called, what is called in Tibetan Ngotra, which is simply the word for to introduce. And introduce, if you want to get really fancy with the word, you could say reveal, a little more far out. But it's something like that, mind to mind, whatever, all these words. And then, for whatever reason, Trungpa Rinpoche decided to call that transmission. But the word transmission is actually used in a whole other lot of contexts of simply passing one thing on to another, not referring necessarily to a mind introduction. So that's where our problem is in the different uses of the word transmission in English, referring with different reference in Tibetan, in different groups. It becomes very complicated. So in the normal language in Tibetan, just the word transmission, which can mean just like lineage or passing teachings or giving a transmission, which would be a reading transmission, lung. It's not a problematic word at all. It's how it just transmits from one to another. The kind of usage in the Shambhala community of a mind transmission in which you are introduced to the nature of mind, like I said, is this other word, notre, which is usually translated as something like pointing out or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about how it correlates to, I guess the whole mind-to-mind transmission sort of gets at what I was curious about with regard to the moving of spiritual energy.
Yeah.
Basically, one generation to from
right.
one person to another.
So transmission of lineage, the lineage energy,
as opposed to
the lineage blessing.
That everyone showed up at the right place.
Right. Yeah, and in that sense, that's presented many problems in the West, and it presented problems in Tibet too, because it's not as clear. In terms of lineage, for instance, who is claiming to be a lineage holder or not what does that mean? The Zen tradition has this big ceremony, the mountain seat, and blah, blah, blah. And so in that group, what it means when you say transmission, it's very specific. And seems not, the transmission and lineage holders and so forth in Tibet tended to be very intimately connected with the idea of incarnate lamas. So now in the West, we're not going by that system necessarily, although the Tibetans still go by it. And there's been a few attempts to implant that, and it hasn't worked very well here. But so what does it mean that somebody is in the transmission and the blessing? Well, I think it means totally, and it's a completely subjective experience, that you're either feeling like you're getting it, the teachings, and it's not fireworks or something. It's just really like, oh, that's what they've been teaching, and that's what my teacher learned from his teacher, and that's what, or her teacher, and that's what they learned back, and so, oh yeah, I get it. They've been like doing this all this time, okay, I can do that, and I feel like I'm in this line. I'm one of a long line of people doing this kind of practice, that's it. That's the transmission. Now, that's different than claiming to be a lineage holder, which is a completely different phenomenon and has to do with how many disciples you have and how many, how much your own legacy carries on. But just in terms of receiving the transmission of a lineage, if you're doing the practice that's been authentically passed down, then you're in the lineage. You're doing the transmission. It's been transmitted to you. Needn't be this big deal thing.